A transaction nearing $500 million dangled, held within the opulent quiet of a private dining salon. On one side of the table sat two of the technology sector's most unyielding executives. Facing them, a mysterious Japanese magnate, Kalen Voss, declined to articulate a solitary English word. They viewed her stillness as frailty, her alien phrases as drivel. They smirked, they whispered, they disparaged her, confident in their dominance. They believed they were fully in command. What they didn't realize was that their every sneer and every falsehood was being observed by the sole individual in the chamber. They never even noticed the server. The atmosphere in the private dining salon of the Sovereign, one of downtown Meridian's most exclusive eateries, was substantial enough to be sliced with the polished silver cutlery arranged on the table. It was an ambiance of compelled patience, a palpable tension simmering beneath a veneer of corporate decorum. The room itself made a profound statement. Walls paneled with dark, lustrous mahogany, a crystal chandelier that dripped radiance onto the table like frozen droplets, and a single expansive window offering a commanding vista of the sprawling urban lights beneath. On one side of the grand table sat Julian Croft and Silas Cale. Julian, the CEO of Croft Enterprises, was a man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair that appeared meticulously styled and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating azure eyes. He projected an aura of inherited wealth and unwavering authority. Beside him, his vice president of acquisitions, Silas, was a younger, sleeker iteration of the same predator. His suit was sharper, his grin wider, but his eyes held that same hungry gleam. They were present to finalize the deal of a lifetime, the acquisition of Voss Innovations, a Japanese corporation at the forefront of biointegrative AI. And on the opposite side of the table was the source of their apprehension. Kalen Voss. She was not what they had anticipated. Her surname Voss stemmed from a brief, long-ago marriage to an American academic, but her entire presence was a portrait of Japanese elegance and restraint. She was perhaps in her late 60s, her posture rigidly upright, her silver-streaked hair secured in a simple, refined knot. She wore a modest, dark silk gown unadorned by any jewelry save for a simple jade ring. Her visage, a mask of serene impassivity, revealed nothing. Accompanying her was her trusted aide, a younger man named Ethan Lee, who sat slightly behind her, his expression a perfect reflection of his employer's composure. The issue began the moment she arrived after the initial pleasantries facilitated by Ethan. Kalen Voss had spoken, but her utterances were not the crisp, accented English they were prepared for. They were Japanese, soft, melodic, and utterly incomprehensible to Julian and Silas. "Mr. Croft, Ms. Voss is pleased to be here and appreciates you hosting this supper." Ethan had translated, his own English flawless. Julian had forced a chuckle. Of course, a pleasure. Please convey to her, we are honored." As the appetizers were served, a delicate presentation of seared scallops and yuzu foam, Julian tried again. "Ms. Voss, your contributions to neural interfacing are simply groundbreaking. We believe that combined with our global distribution network, we can transform the world." He paused, beaming, awaiting the interpretation. Ethan leaned in, murmured to Kalen in Japanese, and she responded with a brief, quiet statement. Ethan turned back. "Ms. Voss comprehends the potential synergies." The discourse, if it could be termed that, persisted in this awkward, exasperating manner for nearly an hour. Julian and Silas would deliver a paragraph of enthusiastic corporate commendation, which Ethan would distill into a whisper, receiving a single-sentence reply that he would then translate back. It was akin to attempting to play tennis with a brick wall. Silas was losing his composure. He leaned towards Julian, cupping his hand to his mouth in a poor attempt at discretion. What is this, Julian? Is this some sort of power play? Forcing us to go through him for everything. She's making us beg. Julian's smile was taut, a facade of professionalism fracturing at the edges. Maintain calm, Silas. This is how they conduct business. It's about deference, hierarchy. Just engage in the ritual. The prize is worth $500 million. But it felt like more than a mere game. Kaylin Voss's eyes, dark and perceptive, seemed to track their every motion. She seldom glanced at Ethan when he translated, but instead observed them, her gaze unwavering. It was unsettling. She would occasionally articulate something directly to them, a torrent of Japanese that sounded like an inquiry. Her head tilted slightly. Each instance they would look at Ethan with panicked helplessness. She asks if you enjoyed your recent vacation in the Caribbean, Mr. Croft. Ethan would translate, his face unreadable. Julian would blink, caught off guard. Oh yes, it was splendid. Very relaxing. How did she... And she notes that your company's stock declined 2 points this afternoon after the quarterly projections were leaked, Mr. Cale. Ethan would continue, conveying another of Kaylin's soft-spoken observations. Silas's face would pale slightly. They were being scrutinized, analyzed, and the woman wielding the scalpel was speaking a language that rendered them utterly impotent. Their exasperation was curdling into a perilous blend of fury and overconfidence. They were the titans of industry here, not her. This was their metropolis, their establishment, their agreement, and they were being made to feel like simpletons. Chloe adjusted the crisp white apron tied around her waist, her movements practiced and hushed as she navigated the perimeter of the private dining salon. She was a phantom in this lavish realm, trained to be imperceptible. Her duty was to anticipate requirements before they were voiced, to replenish a water glass the moment it dropped below half full, to clear a plate with the stealth of a feline, to exist as a pair of hands, not an individual. But Chloe was an observer. It was how she endured not just the arduous shifts at the Sovereign, but existence itself. She noticed the slight tremor in Silas Cale's hand as he reached for his wine, a sign of agitation he was attempting to conceal. She discerned the way Julian Croft's genial smile was a thin, brittle veneer over a chasm of impatience. Most of all, she watched Kaylin Voss. To Julian and Silas, the woman was an obstruction, a peculiar, alien mystery. To Chloe, she was something else entirely. She was familiar. Chloe had grown up in Sakura City. Her father was a cultural attaché at the American Embassy, a quiet academic who had fallen in love with the nation and raised his daughter there for 15 years. She had attended a local Japanese school, her days filled with the rigorous rhythm of the language, her friendships forged in its subtleties. Japanese wasn't merely a secondary language to her. It was the tongue of her youth, of scraped knees and initial heartbreaks, of whispered confidences with her closest friend Ren. It was the language she still dreamt in sometimes. Now working 2 jobs to finance her fine arts degree at Metropolitan University, those years felt a lifetime away. Here she was, just Chloe, the quiet server. No one realized that the soft, flowing words spoken by Voss were as plain as day to her, and what she heard made the fine hairs on her arms prickle. She heard the interpretations Ethan Lee provided, and they were precise, but they were also incomplete. They were literal. They were the sterile, functional phrases of a professional interpreter. What they lacked was the essence, the subtle honorifics, the intricate underlying meaning that was woven into every syllable Voss uttered. When Kaylin had inquired about Julian's holiday, her tone hadn't been merely curious. There was a layer of polite, almost surgical exactitude, a phrase that subtly hinted, I know you were conducting unofficial dealings on that excursion. When she had mentioned Silas's stock dip, her choice of words was not just an observation. It was a delicate yet unmistakable expression of disapproval, the kind a tutor might employ for a promising pupil who had failed a simple examination. She was speaking in a highly formal, almost courtly dialect of Japanese, one that conveyed immense authority and intellect. Chloe watched as Silas, growing bolder with his exasperation, launched a new strategy, a condescendingly simple English spoken loudly as if Kalen were deaf or simple-minded. "We are offering you a very good price," he said, holding up his fingers. "Lots of money." Chloe winced. The affront was so profound, so deeply ignorant that she felt a phantom pang of shame on his behalf. She saw Kalen Voss's eyes for a fraction of a second flicker with something that resembled pain. Not anger, but a deep, weary sorrow. Ethan Lee's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, dutifully translating Silas's boorish words. Kalen responded, her voice still quiet, but with an edge, a sharpness that wasn't present before. Ethan translated, "Ms. Voss understands the financial proposal, but what she had actually said was, 'Please inform this child that the buzzing of a fly is more disruptive to my thoughts than his shouting.'" Chloe nearly dropped the silver water pitcher she was holding. She steadied herself against the wall, her heart pounding. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a catastrophe. These men, in their blind arrogance, were dismantling a $500 million agreement with every patronizing word, and Voss was permitting them. She was observing their disrespect, cataloging it, her silence a vessel for their disdain. The final provocation came when Julian, convinced that the woman opposite him was either playing a foolish charade or was genuinely inept, decided to discuss strategy with Silas openly right at the table. "Look, this is going nowhere," Julian muttered, leaning across the table as if Ethan were merely furniture. "Let's just get to the final offer. We'll cut out the performance incentives for her executive team. She clearly can't manage them. If this is how she behaves, we can absorb them into our own structure and save $20 million off the top. She'll never even know the difference. Just tell her it's a streamlined final offer." Silas grinned, a flash of predatory teeth. "Brilliant. She's lost in her own world. He'll just translate whatever we tell him to." Chloe stood frozen by the service entrance, the cold metal of the handle pressing into her back. They were going to defraud her right here in front of her, using her own childhood language as a shield for their deception. They presumed her inability to speak English equated to an inability to comprehend complex deal frameworks. They saw a female, not a titan. They saw an alien, not a prodigy. And in that moment, Chloe felt the 15 years in Sakura City surge within her. She recalled her father instructing her that silence in Japan could signify reverence, profound contemplation, strength. It was not a void to be filled with clamor and hubris. She looked at Voss's face, at the deep, solitary intelligence in her eyes. It was the same expression she'd seen in her own grandmother's eyes after her grandfather had passed away. A woman surrounded by individuals who only perceived her as a frail widow, not the pillar of resilience she truly was. Her manager's voice echoed in her head. "You are imperceptible, Chloe. Do not address the patrons unless spoken to, ever." It was the cardinal regulation. Violating it meant immediate dismissal. It meant rent would not be paid. It meant her aspiration of completing her degree would vanish. But then she heard Kalen Voss speak again, her voice almost a whisper. And this time it was not directed at the men. It was a soft, forlorn murmur, almost to herself. "Is there no one here who perceives?" Chloe's decision was made. Her employment, her prospects. They felt insignificant compared to the colossal injustice unfolding in this gilded enclosure. She pushed off the door, smoothed her apron, and advanced towards the table, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. As Chloe approached the table, the world seemed to decelerate. Each stride on the plush Persian rug was a deliberate act of defiance. The clinking of flatware, the low drone of the city outside, everything receded into a muffled background hum. All that mattered were the four figures at the table, locked in their tableau of misunderstanding and duplicity. Julian and Silas didn't even notice her initially. They were too occupied smirking at each other, confident in their scheme. Ethan Lee's head was slightly bowed, a portrait of resignation. Only Kalen Voss's eyes lifted to meet Chloe's. For a fleeting instant, Chloe saw a flicker of surprise in them, a momentary crack in the serene facade. Chloe halted, not beside Julian or Silas, but at a respectful distance from Kalen's side of the table. She took a slow, deep breath, the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere feeling thin in her lungs. This was it. She bowed, not a deferential servant's nod, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, the kind she hadn't performed in years. It was a bow of profound respect, one reserved for an elder, a mentor, a person of immense standing. The gesture was so unexpected it cleaved through the room's tension. Julian and Silas ceased speaking, their heads snapping in her direction. "What the hell is this?" Silas muttered, a sneer contorting his lips. "Can we get some more wine here, or?" His voice trailed off as Chloe straightened up, looked directly at Kalen Voss and spoke. Her Japanese was impeccable. It was the Sakura City dialect of her youth, formal, humble, and clear as a temple bell. "Voss-sama," she began, using the highest form of address, one that bordered on veneration. "Forgive my unforgivable impertinence. I am but a humble attendant here. However, to stand by and witness this discourtesy is a blemish upon this establishment and my own honor. If you would permit me, I can assist." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a stunned, deafening void. Julian and Silas stared at her, their mouths literally agape. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly recited classical poetry. This girl, the one who had been silently refilling their water, who they hadn't given a second glance, was speaking the very language that had been their barrier of frustration all evening. Ethan Lee's head shot up, his eyes wide with incredulity. He looked from Chloe to Kalen, his professional composure completely shattered for the first time. But the most profound reaction came from Kalen Voss herself. The impassive mask she had worn all night crumbled. Her eyes, which had held a universe of solitary wisdom, welled up with sudden glistening tears. Her lips parted slightly, and a small choked sound escaped her. It was a sound of immense, soul-shattering relief. It was the sound of a captive who, after years in solitary confinement, finally hears a voice speaking their native tongue. She responded to Chloe, her own voice thick with emotion yet still retaining its innate grace. You understand?" she asked, her words a fragile whisper. "You understand what has been said? The meaning behind the words?" "I understand everything, Voss-sama," Chloe replied, her own voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I grew up in Sakura City. I hear not only your words, but your spirit." This exchange, lasting no more than 10 seconds, completely reconfigured the power dynamic in the room. Julian and Silas were no longer in command. They were outsiders, excluded from a dialogue that was suddenly flowing with more genuine emotion and significance than anything they had managed in 2 hours. "What is she uttering?" Julian demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. He pointed a finger at Chloe. Who are you? What did you say to her? Chloe did not look at him. Her attention remained entirely on Kaylin. She was no longer merely a server. She was a conduit, a bridge over a chasm of cultural ignorance. Kaylin Voss, with tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks, gestured a delicate, elegant hand towards the empty chair beside her. It was an invitation, an imperative. She spoke again, a short, clear sentence in Japanese. Ethan Lee, finally regaining his voice, translated for the bewildered executives, though his eyes were fixed on Chloe with a look of reverence. Ms. Voss requests that the young lady join them at the table. Silas scoffed in disbelief. Join them? She's the waitress. This is preposterous. But Julian Croft, for all his hubris, was a man who comprehended power, and he could feel it shifting in the chamber as surely as a tide. The quiet Japanese woman was no longer a passive entity. She had found a voice, and that voice belonged to the girl in the white apron. He fell silent, observing, his mind racing to compute this new, impossible variable. Chloe hesitated for only a moment. Then, with a quiet grace she didn't know she possessed, she pulled out the chair and sat down. The world had just inverted, and somehow she was at its epicenter. Seated at the mahogany table, the fine linen of the napkin feeling foreign in her lap, Chloe felt a profound sense of unreality. The crystal goblets, the ornate flatware, the half-eaten plates of Michelin-starred cuisine, they were relics from a world she served, not one she inhabited. Yet the gaze of Kaylin Voss anchored her, imbuing her with a purpose that dwarfed her anxieties. Julian and Silas watched, their expressions a blend of confusion and fury. This was a blatant violation of every protocol they comprehended. I think we merit an explanation, Julian stated, his voice dangerously subdued. He addressed Ethan Lee, but his glare was fixed on Chloe. What is transpiring? Before Ethan could speak, Kaylin addressed Chloe directly in Japanese, her voice now calm and imbued with a quiet authority. Chloe listened intently, then turned her gaze to the two American executives. For the first time she spoke to them, her voice clear and measured. My name is Chloe. Ms. Voss has asked me to interpret for her. She paused, allowing the simple declaration to settle. She feels it is time for you to understand the full context of this encounter. Ethan Lee nodded slowly, granting Chloe his unspoken consent. He understood his role as a purely professional interpreter was inadequate for what was required now. What was needed was a human connection. Chloe turned back to Kaylin, who began to speak. She didn't speak of commerce, of robotics, or share prices. She spoke of a rainy Tuesday in Tokyo 6 months prior. She spoke of a black vehicle, a slick road, and the shriek of tires that was the last sound she remembered before regaining consciousness in a realm of muted hues and perplexing noises. As Kaylin spoke, Chloe translated, her voice becoming a conduit for the older woman's anguish and frustration. 6 months ago, Chloe began, her words painting a stark image in the opulent room. Ms. Voss was involved in a severe automobile accident. She sustained a traumatic brain injury, specifically to the areas of her brain that govern language processing, Broca's and Wernicke's areas. She paused. Julian and Silas exchanged a look of disbelief. Her cognitive functions, Chloe continued, the words flowing through her. Her memory, her intellect, her brilliant engineering mind, they are all perfectly intact. She is the same woman who built a global empire from nothing. But the injury has caused a specific and rare form of expressive aphasia. Chloe took a breath, ensuring she conveyed the gravity of the situation precisely as Kaylin was articulating it. When she is under duress, her brain defaults. It reverts to its most fundamental neural pathways. For her, that is her native language. The English she acquired in her 20s is inaccessible, a locked chamber in her own mind. The more she attempts to force the words, the more they elude her. The narrative hung in the air, weighty and astonishing. Kaylin Voss was not being difficult. She was not engaging in a power game. She was impaired. She was imprisoned inside her own brilliant intellect, capable of comprehending everything, but unable to command the language her audience demanded. "Why wasn't this revealed?" Silas blurted out, his tone more accusatory than sympathetic. "We've been squandering our time here." Kaylin's eyes flashed, and she spoke a sharp single sentence. "Dignity is not an itemized cost in a quarterly report." Chloe translated, her voice as sharp as Kaylin's. Ms. Voss did not wish to be defined by her injury. She did not desire pity, nor did she wish to be perceived as a liability by the corporation she dedicated her existence to building. This agreement is not merely an acquisition for her. It is her legacy. She needs to know that the individuals she is entrusting it to are people of character, not just opportunists. Chloe's translation was imbued with the fierce pride she heard in Kaylin's Japanese. "She came here tonight to look you in the eye, to assess your character, your patience, your empathy. She believes you can discover more about an individual from how they behave when they are perplexed than when they are at ease." A wave of shame, so potent it was almost tangible, should have washed over Julian and Silas. Their condescension, their loud, slow-talking insults, their whispered conspiracy to defraud her. All of it had been a trial they had failed spectacularly. But shame was not a currency Julian Croft dealt in. He saw not a misfortune, but an opening, a vulnerability to be exploited. His mind, ever the calculator, was already re-evaluating the transaction based on this fresh intelligence. A susceptible vendor, a vendor with a cerebral injury. He leaned forward, his earlier vexation replaced by a slick, predatory commiseration. "Ms. Voss, Kaylin? My God, that's dreadful. We had no notion. Please accept our sincerest apologies. Of course, we comprehend. And we wish to assist." His eyes gleamed. "In fact, this simplifies everything so much. We can alleviate the burden from your shoulders. We can expedite the agreement, manage the specifics so you can concentrate on your recuperation. There's no need to burden you with the intricate clauses and performance metrics." Silas quickly grasped the situation, his expression shifting to one of feigned concern. "Yes, absolutely. The last thing you require is more stress. We can sign a letter of intent tonight, a simple one, just to commence the process, for your own well-being." Chloe felt a chill creep up her spine as she interpreted their words. She relayed the meaning, the sympathetic inflection, but she also perceived the truth behind their gazes. They were predators that had just detected blood in the water. They weren't seeing a person to be respected. They were seeing a target to be vanquished. Kaylin Voss listened to the interpretation, her face unreadable once more. She then looked at Chloe, and in her eyes Chloe saw a flicker of the same weary disappointment she had seen earlier. The examination was not concluded. In fact, it had just entered its most perilous stage. The supper was no longer a supper. It was a skirmish. And Chloe, the server, was now standing on the front line, armed with nothing but her comprehension of 2 languages and a growing sense of foreboding. The air, which had briefly cleared with the honesty of Kaylin's disclosure, was now thick with a new kind of toxin, predatory opportunism. Julian slid a leather-bound folder from his briefcase and placed it in the center of the table. It landed with a soft, decisive thud. "This is our revised proposal," he announced, his voice smooth as silk. "It's simplified, much more direct. It accelerates the payout and places the operational transition entirely in our hands. It's a turnkey solution designed for your peace of mind, Kaylin. He was using her given name now. The false intimacy was nauseating. Chloe felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her abdomen. She was a fine art student. She understood Renaissance painters and modernist sculpture, not leveraged buyouts and equity transfers, but she had to attempt. She had to be more than a mere mouthpiece. Kaylin gestured for Chloe to examine the document. As Chloe picked it up, she felt its heft, the cool, smooth paper filled with dense, legalistic prose. She began to read the pivotal clauses aloud to Kaylin in Japanese, her voice slow and meticulous. As she did, she could feel Julian and Silas watching her, their patience already diminishing. Clause 7B, Julian interrupted, is a standard indemnity provision, just legal boilerplate. We can bypass that. Section 12, Silas added, just outlines the redundancy protocols for her executive team. It's really just a formality. They were attempting to direct her, to regulate the flow of information. But as Chloe read, a phrase snagged her attention. She had spent enough late nights helping her diplomat father proofread documents to recognize the scent of deliberately obscure wording. One moment, Chloe said, holding up a hand. She looked at Kaylin and switched to Japanese. Voss-sama. They are glossing over these sections, but the language here is evasive. Clause 7B is not a standard indemnity provision. It appears to grant their company unilateral power to renegotiate all of Voss Innovations' existing intellectual property licenses after the merger. They could liquidate your core patents. Kaylin's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She gave a slight nod for Chloe to continue. And Section 12, Chloe went on, her heart pounding, is not about redundancy. It's a non-compete clause, but it is drafted so broadly that it would not only prevent your top executives from working elsewhere, it would effectively prohibit you personally from engaging in any related technological ventures for a period of 10 years. They are attempting to acquire not just your company, but your future. Chloe was no longer merely interpreting. She was analyzing. She was safeguarding. With every sentence she deciphered, she felt a surge of adrenaline. The two powerful men at the table suddenly seemed smaller, their expensive attire and confident grins, nothing more than cheap disguise for their avarice. Julian was becoming agitated. What's the delay? What are you conveying to her? Just tell her it's a standard agreement. Chloe met his glare, her own expression resolute. I am ensuring Ms. Voss comprehends the full and precise meaning of every clause, Mr. Croft. As you can appreciate, lucidity is paramount in a transaction of this magnitude. Her formal corporate language, coming from a server, seemed to stun him into momentary silence. Kaylin then posed a question in Japanese, her tone deceptively light. Chloe translated. Ms. Voss is curious about the revised valuation of the company's research and development division. The initial proposal had it estimated at $100 million. In this new document, that figure appears to be absent, assimilated into a general assets category. Silas waved a dismissive hand. It's a clerical simplification. The overall figure is what matters. It's all included. Don't fret. Kaylin spoke again, her words soft but carrying the weight of steel. Chloe's interpretation was precise. Voss-sama says that in her experience, when a figure of that magnitude becomes silent, it is rarely for clerical reasons. She asks you to indicate the exact line item where the value of her life's research is accounted for. A bead of perspiration trickled down Silas Cale's temple. He and Julian began leafing through their copies of the document, a frantic rustling sound that permeated the room. They were discomfited. They had presumed their adversary was incapacitated, that the interpreter was a simple instrument. They had never anticipated such surgical, informed questioning. They had never anticipated Chloe. Kaylin Voss sat back in her chair, a picture of absolute serenity. She took a delicate sip of her tea. For the first time all evening, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips. She was not the wounded creature they had perceived. She was a huntress, and she had just observed her quarry walk confidently into a snare of their own creation. Chloe realized with a jolt that Kaylin's inquiries weren't just for information. She already possessed the answers. She understood the contract flawlessly. The aphasia affected her capacity to speak English, not to read it. She hadn't required an interpreter for the words on the page. She had required one for the men in the room. She had required a witness. The entire evening, the silence, the confusion, her apparent vulnerability, it had all been the most elaborate, high-stakes character assessment imaginable. And now it was time for the culminating examination. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. The cloying scent of predatory self-assurance had been replaced by the acrid odor of terror. Julian and Silas were whispering vehemently to each other, their heads bent over the agreement, unable to locate the justification they needed. Their carefully constructed facade of authority was crumbling into dust. Kaylin Voss watched them for an extended moment, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Chloe and began to speak. Her Japanese was different now. The soft, formal tones were gone, replaced by a voice that was crisp, authoritative, and utterly resolute. It was the voice of a CEO, a leader, a woman who had bent the male-dominated world of technology to her will. Chloe listened, her eyes wide. The directives were specific, the message devastatingly unambiguous. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and prepared to deliver the decisive blow. She turned to Julian and Silas, whose frantic whispering ceased as they saw the look on her face. "Gentlemen," Chloe began, her voice resonating with an authority that was not entirely her own. "Ms. Voss has instructed me to convey her final determination." She let the words linger in the air, the silence extending into an uncomfortable eternity. "First," Chloe said, her gaze locking onto Julian, "regarding your attempt to conceal the intellectual property clause, Ms. Voss recognizes this as a blatant effort to asset strip her company, effectively pilfering the core technology patents that are the very soul of Voss Innovations. She considers this not just a breach of good faith, but a profound personal affront." Julian's face went pale. "Second," Chloe continued, turning to Silas, "regarding the deceptively phrased non-compete clause, Ms. Voss finds it amusing. The suggestion that she would permit a man like you, who cannot even read his own balance sheet without leaking it, to dictate the terms of her life's work is, in her words, the zenith of delusional arrogance." Silas looked as if he had been physically struck. "And third," Chloe said, her voice dropping slightly, regarding the deliberate obscuration of the R&D division's value. That division is currently developing Project Chimera, a technology you are not even aware of, which has a projected market value far exceeding this entire company. Your attempt to acquire it for nothing is duly noted." The two men were speechless, utterly vanquished. They had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and exposed by the very woman they had dismissed as a confused old foreigner. But the masterstroke was yet to come. Kaylin spoke one final time in Japanese, a short, simple phrase. As she did, her aide Ethan Lee, who had been silent for over an hour, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. Julian's voice, tiny and distorted, filled the silent room. Let's just get to the final offer. We'll cut out the performance incentives for her executive team. We can absorb them into our own structure and save 20 million off the top. She'll never even know the difference. Silas's voice followed, dripping with disdain. Brilliant. She's lost in her own world. He'll just translate whatever we tell him to. The recording played their entire whispered conversation, every greedy, dismissive, and fraudulent word echoing in the opulent dining room like a death knell. When it finished, a profound silence descended. Julian Croft looked ashen, his silver hair suddenly seeming less distinguished and more like the mark of an old, weary fool. Silas Cale was staring at the recorder as if it were a venomous serpent. And then, the ultimate marvel transpired. Kaylin Voss looked across the table directly at Julian and Silas. She leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that was quiet, raspy from disuse, but perfectly, chillingly clear, she spoke her first English words of the night. "I believe," she said, her accent a faint, elegant melody, "this negotiation is concluded." The shock was absolute. It was a thunderclap in a silent sanctuary. The locked chamber in her mind had been opened. Perhaps it was the release of tension, the adrenaline of triumph, or simply the sheer force of her volition. But she had broken through the aphasia. She stood up, her posture regal. Ethan Lee held her chair. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Chloe, a gesture of immense gratitude and shared victory. Then, without another glance at the two ruined men, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of a $500 million transaction and two careers that were, for all intents and purposes, finished. The sound of the door clicking shut was the loudest noise Chloe had ever heard. Of course, here is a rewritten and significantly expanded version of Part 7, delving deeper into the emotional and psychological aftermath for Chloe, drawing out the tension and making the life-changing offer a more detailed and profound moment. Chloe stood alone in the private dining salon, a specter in a gilded cage that had suddenly become a sepulcher. The silence left in Kaylin Voss's wake was not tranquil. It was a physical presence, a high-pitched ringing in her ears that was the sound of her existence teetering on a razor's edge. The rich aroma of roasted duck and truffle oil now seemed cloying and extravagant, the scent of a world she had just transgressed. Julian and Silas had vanished like phantoms, their frantic retreat leaving behind a palpable aura of ignominy. They had left everything, briefcases agape, pens, and the deceitful contract sitting squarely in the center of the table, a memorial to their avarice. The adrenaline that had sharpened her faculties and steadied her voice began its cruel withdrawal, leaving a cold, trembling fragility in its place. She reached out and touched the back of the mahogany chair she had occupied, the wood still warm. It was the only thing that felt concrete. Had that all just occurred? Had she? Chloe, a fine arts scholar who supplemented her ramen noodle diet by serving canapes to the 1%, just committed career self-destruction in the most spectacular manner imaginable. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Each beat a frantic query. What have I done? What have I done? The paramount rule, the one etched into every attendant at the Sovereign, shrieked in her mind, "You are unseen. You are mute. You do not exist." She had not only existed, she had appointed herself arbiter, adjudicator, and interpreter. The service door swung open with a violent clang, and her manager, a stern man named Mr. Beaumont, with a perpetually furrowed brow, stormed into the chamber. His face was a mottled shade of scarlet, his eyes blazing with a rage that made Chloe's blood run cold. "Chloe," he hissed, his voice a low, perilous weapon. He didn't bellow. It was far more terrifying than that. Do you have any comprehension of what you have just accomplished? Chloe stood rigid, her hands clasped behind her back in a stance of ingrained subservience. Mr. Beaumont, I can elucidate. Elucidate? He let out a short, incredulous laugh that contained no mirth. Elucidate what? How you decided to abandon your station? How you took it upon yourself to sit down? Sit down with a guest in the midst of a private dinner? I have Julian Croft's chief of staff on the telephone, screaming so loudly I'm astonished the crystal in here hasn't fractured. He's threatening to initiate legal action not just against you, but this entire establishment for breach of privacy, for unprofessional conduct, for heaven knows what else. He advanced on her, his steps menacing on the plush carpeting. Our standing is predicated on discretion, on silent, flawless service. And you, in 10 minutes, have potentially ruined it. You are dismissed. Of course, that is a given. But I guarantee you will be so blacklisted in this metropolis, you won't be able to secure employment washing dishes in a back alley eatery. Gather your belongings. Get out of my sight. Each word was a spike being driven into the casket of her precarious existence in New York. Her tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. Her rent was already overdue. The aspiration of one day curating a gallery, of a life enveloped by art and beauty, dissolved into a terrifying specter of eviction notices and crushing indebtedness. She had acted on principle, on a deep-seated conviction of justice, and this was her recompense: ruination. As Chloe opened her mouth to speak, though she had no words to proffer, the dining salon door opened again, this time with a soft, deliberate click. Ethan Lee stood on the threshold, his presence instantly commanding the space. His suit was pristine, his expression utterly composed, but his eyes held a cold fire that made Mr. Beaumont's theatrical fury appear childish. "I believe you are mistaken," Ethan said, his voice quiet, yet carrying an authority that sliced through the manager's tirade. He took a step into the room, his gaze fixed on Mr. Beaumont. Miss Chloe was not acting on her own volition. She was acting on a direct and explicit request from my employer, Ms. Kaylin Voss. Mr. Beaumont blinked, his momentum broken. What? That's impossible. She was providing a service that neither you nor your esteemed patrons were equipped to offer. Clarity and respect, Ethan continued, his tone unwavering. He took another step, and the manager instinctively took one back. The power dynamic had been instantly redrawn. As for Mr. Croft, I would advise him to be very cautious about issuing threats. We possess a recording of him and Mr. Cale conspiring to commit wire fraud and contractual deception. My subsequent call is to our legal team. His chief of staff will soon have far more pressing concerns than the deportment of a server. The color drained from Mr. Beaumont's face. The name Voss, which before had just been a name on a booking, now landed with the gravitas of a global conglomerate and its legion of attorneys. Ethan's attention shifted from the stunned manager to Chloe. The coldness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a genuine warmth and a profound look of respect that felt more valuable than any stipend. Ms. Voss would like to converse with you. She is waiting in her automobile downstairs. Please accompany me. He said it not as an imperative, but as a gentle invitation. He then turned his head slightly towards Mr. Beaumont. See to it that her personal effects are gathered and delivered to the address I will furnish. She will not be returning. Without another word, he held the door open for Chloe. She walked past her former manager, who stood agape like a fish, his authority utterly dismantled. She didn't look back. She walked through the bustling main dining room, where other servers and personnel paused their tasks to stare, whispering behind their hands. She was a curiosity, a controversy in motion. She felt their eyes on her back as she divested her white apron, folding it and placing it on a service counter. a final symbolic gesture of abandoning that world. She followed Ethan out of the opulent restaurant and into the cool, damp night air of Meridian. At the curb, a sleek black Rolls-Royce was softly idling, its engine a barely audible purr. It wasn't merely a vehicle. It was a conveyance from another dimension, a silent, imposing declaration of influence. Ethan opened the rear door, and Chloe, feeling as though she was stepping into a reverie, slid inside. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, and the chaotic symphony of the city, the sirens, the horns, the chatter, was instantly muted, replaced by an unnerving, profound stillness. The interior was vast, smelling of rich leather and the subtle, clean aroma of jasmine. Across from her, illuminated by the soft glow of the cabin lights and the passing street lamps, sat Kaylin Voss. She looked fatigued, her face etched with a weariness that hadn't been present in the restaurant. The immense exertion of the evening, of maintaining her composure, of compelling her mind to reclaim a language held captive by trauma, had clearly taken its toll. She leaned her head back against the plush headrest. Her eyes closed for an extended moment. When she opened them, they were fixed on Chloe, and they were filled with a deep, soulful appreciation. "The silence," she began, her English quiet but steady, each word seeming to extract a small measure of energy. "It is a very solitary place, Chloe. For 6 months I have been adrift in it. People either bellow at me as if I am an imbecile, or they speak about me as if I am non-existent. Tonight, you restored my voice, not just by articulating my language, but by discerning what I did not utter." Chloe was overwhelmed, twisting her hands in her lap. I don't know what to express, Ms. Voss. I thought I was going to be terminated. I was terrified. I grew up in Sakura City. My father was a diplomat, and to hear them, the way they addressed you, the disrespect, I couldn't simply remain there. Kaylin's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "I know. I perceived it in your eyes long before you approached the table. I saw you recoil when Mr. KL shouted. I saw your jaw clench when Mr. Croft commenced his conspiracy. I was observing them, but I was also observing you." She leaned forward, her intensity filling the confined space. "The mishap altered everything for me. It revealed how swiftly the world can turn against you. The instant they detect a vulnerability, the predators begin to encircle. My enterprise, the legacy I have cultivated for 40 years, is susceptible. I need to locate a successor, a collaborator, someone to safeguard it. But how can I trust anyone's motivations? Now, everyone who approaches me sees either a casualty to be pitied or an opportunity to be exploited. The world, I have discovered, is replete with Julians and Silases." Chloe listened, enthralled, understanding that this was more than just an elucidation. It was an unveiling of the woman behind the legend. "I find myself in need of an individual of rare character," Kaylin continued, her gaze unwavering. "This is not a vocational offer for an interpreter. It is an offer for a new trajectory. I require someone on my personal retinue who comprehends subtlety, who values probity over ambition, someone who can be my sight and sound, who can sit in a room and perceive not just what is being verbalized, but what is being felt. I need someone to be my ethical barometer." She let the words settle, giving Chloe a moment to absorb them. "I possess a foundation," Kaylin said, her voice filled with a renewed fervor. "The Voss Philanthropic Trust for Art and Progress. It finances 2 elements that I believe are the cornerstones of the future: brilliant female engineers and audacious young artists. It is my true heritage. I want you to collaborate with me there, to assist me in discovering the next generation of creators and innovators, to journey with me, to be my aide, my counselor, and my confidant. She paused again, a shrewd, calculating light, the one that had constructed an empire, returning to her eyes. I am cognizant that you are a student. Your instruction will not be disrupted. It will be fully underwritten. Your degree at Metropolitan University will be compensated in full, as will any postgraduate studies you wish to pursue anywhere in the globe. You will be granted a residence in my edifice, so you will not have to concern yourself with rent, and you will be remunerated a salary that will ensure you and your kin will never have to worry about finances again. I am not presenting you with a mere position, Chloe. I am presenting you with a life, a platform, an opportunity to utilize your distinctive aptitude on a global stage. Chloe's mind was reeling. It was too much, too swiftly. Her tiny apartment with its leaky tap, the mountain of student loan debt, the constant grinding anxiety of simply endeavoring to survive in the city. Kaylin was offering to obliterate it all with a few pronouncements, but it was more than that. It was an offer of purpose, of significance. It was an invitation to step out of the shadows and into the illumination. The sheer magnitude of it was terrifying. A leap into an unknown so vast she couldn't discern the other side. "Why me?" Chloe whispered, the question born of a lifetime of feeling commonplace. "I'm a server, an art student. I'm nobody." Kaylin reached across the expanse and for a fleeting moment rested her hand on Chloe's. Her touch was light, but it anchored Chloe in the surreal instance. "Do not ever utter that," Kaylin said, her voice firm but gentle. "Julian and Silas are somebodies. They have designations, reputations, fortunes. They perceive the world as a ledger of assets and liabilities. They compute, they leverage, they acquire, but they are sightless. You discern, you perceive individuals. Tonight, you saw me when I was imperceptible to everyone else. That is not a proficiency you acquire, Chloe. It is a fundamental component of who you are. And in my sphere, a world constructed on pretense and aspiration, that endowment is a superpower. I do not require another calculator in my existence. I require someone who can perceive." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, not of sadness or apprehension, but of a profound, overwhelming sensation of being truly seen for the first time in her life. The years of being a quiet spectator, of feeling like a phantom in her own existence, had not been in vain. It had all been preparation for this singular moment. She took a deep, shaky breath, the air in the silent vehicle feeling charged with her destiny. She looked into Kaylin Voss's eyes and saw not a millionaire or a tech magnate, but a mentor, a kindred spirit. A new portal was opening, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she had to traverse it. "Yes," Chloe said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Ms. Voss, I would be honored." A brilliant, exquisite smile spread across Kaylin's face. "Kaylin," she corrected gently. "From now on, you will address me as Kaylin." As she spoke, the automobile pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the current of traffic. Chloe looked out the window at the towering skyscrapers of Meridian, their lights twinkling like a constellation of earthbound luminaries. Just an hour ago, she had been a minuscule, inconsequential speck in that vast, indifferent city. Now, as the Rolls-Royce moved through the night, she felt like she was finally on her way to becoming one of them. The expedition was just commencing. What you just witnessed wasn't merely a narrative about a business transaction. It's a narrative about the facades we present and the hasty judgments we form every single day. It's about how we consistently underestimate the individuals surrounding us, the quiet associate in the office, the cashier at the grocery store, the server attending our table. We perceive a uniform, a job designation, a silent exterior, and we fill in the remainder with our own preconceptions. But behind every pair of eyes is a universe of experience, a concealed fortitude, a voice awaiting the opportune moment to be heard. Kaylin Voss wasn't a casualty. She was a sovereign testing her court. And Chloe wasn't merely a server. She was the sole individual worthy of entering it. If this narrative resonated with you and reminded you of the extraordinary potency of ordinary benevolence and discernment, please grant this video a like and disseminate it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell for more real-life narratives that unveil the incredible truth that heroes abound around us, often in the most unforeseen locations. Thank you for listening.